After every disaster, we hear the same word, fate. It's a soothing explanation, a way to avoid blame and responsibility. But what if this comfort is a lie that lets the real culprits, greed, negligence, corruption, off the hook? Today, we'll expose how fate is used to mask betrayal. Choices made for profit, safety ignored, warnings dismissed. From earthquakes to floods, the pattern is clear. Disasters blamed on destiny are often crimes in disguise. It's time to unmask those who hide behind fate. Consider two earthquakes. Japan's buildings stand, Turkey's collapse. In Japan, strict codes and planning save lives. In Turkey, corruption, bribes, and shoddy construction turn homes into tombs. Fate is blamed, but the evidence points to human choices. Greed over safety, shortcuts over lives. The difference isn't destiny, it's responsibility. Survival is not luck, it's a right protected or betrayed by those in power. The myth of fate crumbles under scrutiny. The pattern repeats: floods, landslides, storms. Communities built on floodplains, forests clear-cut, warnings ignored, all for profit. When disaster strikes, blame shifts to nature, not the planners or profiteers. These are not acts of fate, but predictable outcomes of negligence and greed. Climate change intensifies the crisis, yet those responsible deny, delay, and profit. The real disaster is systemic betrayal, not bad luck. Fate is just a convenient cover. Catastrophe isn't always dramatic, it's in daily betrayals. Unsafe factories, tainted food, overpriced medicine, all profit-driven choices that endanger lives. Each ignored warning, each regulation bypassed, is a crack in our society's foundation. These betrayals become so common, we mistake them for fate. But they're not accidents. They're the result of eroded ethics and accountability. Ordinary people pay the price while the powerful profit. The real disaster is normalized greed. Are we victims, accepting fate, or witnesses, demanding truth? The narrative of fate serves the powerful, shielding them from scrutiny. Our task is to expose the chain of decisions behind every tragedy. We must connect the dots, follow the money, and reveal the real causes. The path of the witness is hard, but it's the only way to justice. The truth isn't fate, it's a choice to see and act. Will you accept the lie, or become a witness? The ground shakes, an earthquake strikes, shattering our illusion of safety. But while this fear unites us, the outcome divides us. The difference between survival and tragedy isn't fate, it's human choices, policies, priorities, and profit. The earthquake doesn't choose its victims. We do. It's time to expose this truth. Japan, living under the shadow of the Pacific Ring of Fire, faces earthquakes as a fact of life. In 2011, a colossal earthquake struck, but Japan's buildings stood strong. Bullet trains halted, gas lines shut off, and early warnings saved lives. This resilience is no accident, it's the result of strict codes, innovation, and a culture of preparedness. In Japan, the opposite of disaster isn't luck, it's preparation. In February 2023, a massive earthquake struck southeastern Turkey. As dawn broke, entire neighborhoods lay in ruins, not from nature alone, but from human failure. Poor construction, ignored codes, and corruption turned buildings into mass graves. This was not fate, but a man-made catastrophe, decades of betrayal sealed in concrete, exposed by disaster. The devastation of 2023 echoed the tragedy of 1999, a warning ignored. After the Marmara earthquake, promises of reform and safety were made, but soon forgotten. Corruption, weak enforcement, and rapid, unsafe growth returned. The same failures led to even greater loss, a profound betrayal of lessons paid for in blood. In the rubble of Turkey's 2023 earthquake, the betrayal is clear. Smooth rebar, crumbling concrete, and under-reinforced beams reveal a calculated fraud. Contractors built fast and cheap, aided by corrupt officials and inspectors. The result? Buildings that became mass graves. Each link in the chain was broken by greed, leaving monuments to corruption, not safety. Construction amnesties let millions of unsafe, illegal buildings become legal for a fee, turning deadly risks into state-approved homes. The government profited, citizens cheered, but safety was ignored. When disaster struck, these legalized death traps collapsed, exposing a system that chose revenue over lives. It was a fatal betrayal of public trust. The devastation in Turkey was not fate, it was fraud. Earthquakes test more than concrete, they test our governance and conscience. Japan chose safety and discipline, Turkey chose shortcuts and corruption. The victims were not claimed by nature but by a system that betrayed them. Justice, not destiny, must be our answer. Beyond the seismic shocks of earthquakes, the pattern of betrayal extends to another of nature's most powerful forces, water. We are conditioned to view floods as tragic but natural occurrences, the result of unusually heavy rains or a sudden snowmelt. News reports show us swirling, muddy waters engulfing towns and villages, and we are told that nature has once again proven its unpredictable fury. The word fate is used to describe the plight of those who have lost everything to the rising tides. But this narrative conveniently ignores a crucial question. Why were those homes, those schools, and those lives in the path of the water in the first place? This is rarely a mystery, it is a crime scene where the evidence has been washed away. Consider the recurring floods that devastate regions like the Black Sea coast of Turkey. Year after year, torrential rains cause rivers to swell, and year after year, the same towns are inundated. Is this a cruel cycle of destiny? Or is it the entirely predictable outcome of building communities directly on riverbeds and floodplains? Rivers have natural paths, channels they have carved over millennia. For most of the year, these wide beds may seem like placid, empty stretches of land, prime real estate for developers looking to build quickly and cheaply. They construct apartment buildings, shops, and entire neighborhoods in areas that hydrological maps clearly designate as high-risk flood zones. And local authorities, through either incompetence or corruption, sign off on the permits. When the inevitable downpour comes and the river reclaims its ancient path, it is not an act of God, it is an act of physics. The water is not malicious, it is simply following the laws of gravity and flow. The real crime was committed years earlier by the developer who saw cheap land instead of a floodplain, and by the official who saw a bribe instead of a duty to protect citizens. This is not a natural disaster, it is a man-made one. It is a slow-motion catastrophe, set in motion by a signature on a zoning variance, a blind eye turned to illegal construction, and a collective amnesia about the fundamental workings of the natural world. The victims are not unlucky, they were deliberately placed in harm's way. The aftermath is always the same. Politicians arrive in rubber boots for photo opportunities, promising aid and pledging to learn the lessons. But the lessons are never learned, because the underlying system of profit-driven development remains unchanged. The warnings from geologists and environmental scientists who have screamed for decades that these areas are uninhabitable are once again ignored in the rush to rebuild. The river's revenge is not on humanity, but on humanity's arrogance and greed. Each flood, is not a new tragedy, but a recurring symptom of the same disease. A system that allows profit to be privatized while risk is socialized, leaving the most vulnerable to pay the ultimate price. The same criminal negligence that invites the river's floodwaters also invites the earth to slide from the mountainsides. When hillsides collapse and bury entire villages, we are once again told it is a natural disaster, a tragic consequence of heavy rainfall saturating the soil. It is presented as an unpredictable event, a geological roll of the dice. But the stability of a slope is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of environmental integrity. A healthy forested mountainside is a complex ecosystem where the deep roots of trees and vegetation act as a natural net, binding the soil and rock together and absorbing excess water. When this ecosystem is destroyed, the slope becomes a ticking time bomb, and the rain is merely the fuse that lights it. The destruction of these vital ecosystems is rarely a natural process. It is a series of deliberate business decisions. Logging companies, driven by the global demand for timber and paper, engage in rampant clear-cutting, stripping mountainsides bare and leaving behind a scarred landscape of loose soil. Agricultural conglomerates burn and clear forests to make way for profitable monocultures like palm oil or coffee plantations. Unregulated mining operations blast and excavate hillsides, destabilizing their geological structure. Each of these actions weakens the mountain's ability to hold itself together. They are not thinking about the villagers living at the foot of the hill, they are thinking about their quarterly earnings report. This is not fate, it is a landslide by design. The companies responsible often operate with the blessing of governments that prioritize short-term economic gains over long-term environmental stability and human safety. Environmental protection laws are either weak, unenforced, or circumvented through political connections and bribery. The people who live in the shadow of these denuded hills are seldom consulted. They are often poor, rural communities with little political power, whose ancestral lands are sacrificed for corporate profit. When their homes and lives are swept away by a torrent of mud and rock, the corporations that created the hazard are long gone, their profits already banked. Furthermore, the state itself is often a direct accomplice. In the rush to urbanize, governments fail to invest in essential infrastructure for at-risk communities. They do not build the retaining walls, the drainage systems, or the soil stabilization projects that could mitigate the danger. Instead, they allow informal settlements to grow on steep, unstable slopes, offering no services and no protection. It is a political choice, a calculation that the lives of these marginalized citizens are not worth the investment. The landslide, when it comes, is not a surprise. It is the known, accepted, and tolerated cost of a system that treats both nature and the poor as expendable commodities. The frequency and intensity of these so-called natural disasters are escalating globally, and we are told this is the result of climate change, a vast, complex problem for which we are all collectively responsible. This narrative of shared, diffused blame is incredibly convenient for the true architects of the crisis. While it is true that modern life contributes to carbon emissions, the scale of responsibility is not equal. A handful of colossal fossil fuel corporations and state-owned oil companies have, for decades, driven the emissions that are supercharging our weather systems. They have done so while being fully aware of the catastrophic consequences of their business model, a truth they have actively worked to conceal from the public. This is not just a market failure, it is one of the largest and most consequential campaigns of corporate deception in human history. Internal documents have revealed that oil giants like Exxon knew about the link between fossil fuels and global warming as early as the 1970s. Their own scientists predicted the coming climate disruptions with chilling accuracy. But instead of warning the world and transitioning their business, they chose a different path. They chose to betray humanity. They launched a multi-billion-dollar strategy to manufacture doubt, funding front groups and pseudoscientists to attack climate science and confuse the public and policymakers. They deliberately delayed global action for decades, all to protect their record-breaking profits. So when a hurricane intensified by unnaturally warm ocean waters obliterates a coastal community, is that just fate? When a historic drought, exacerbated by shifting weather patterns, leads to widespread famine, is that just an act of nature? Or is it the predictable result of a corporate strategy that placed profit above the survival of a stable planet? The corporations that lobbied against environmental regulations, that funded politicians who denied climate change, and that sold the world a product they knew was dangerously altering the atmosphere are not passive bystanders. They are active perpetrators in the creation of these natural disasters. Their betrayal is global in scale and generational in its impact. This crisis is the ultimate man-made disaster, camouflaged as a series of unrelated, unfortunate weather events. The same companies that caused the problem are now positioning themselves as part of the solution, investing in greenwashing campaigns to present a facade of environmental responsibility while continuing to expand their fossil fuel operations. They have successfully framed the debate around individual responsibility, recycling, driving less, to deflect from their own monumental guilt. But the truth is that no amount of individual action can undo the systemic damage wrought by decades of calculated corporate greed. The climate crisis is not fate. It is the outcome of a successful business plan. In 2022, Pakistan was devastated by catastrophic floods, 1/3 of the country underwater, millions displaced. The disaster was fueled by global emissions, but made worse by local elites building on floodplains, poor infrastructure, and government neglect. This was not just a natural disaster, but a layered betrayal, global, local, and systemic. Section 5. Urban Planning or Urban Chaos, the Concrete Jungle's Flaw. Our concrete jungles, meant to showcase human achievement, often create their own disasters. Paved surfaces block natural drainage, turning rain into flash floods. Green spaces vanish, replaced by profitable developments, while the poorest residents face the greatest risks. Urban chaos isn't fate, it's a failure of leadership, exposing deep inequalities every time disaster strikes. Section 6. From Nature's Warning to Systemic Betrayal. In this act we have journeyed through floods, landslides, and the overarching crisis of our climate. In each case, the pattern is identical and irrefutable. What is presented to us as a natural disaster is, upon closer inspection, a crime of human negligence, greed, and deliberate choice. Nature provides the hazard, the rain, the unstable slope, the seismic fault line, but it is humanity that transforms that hazard into a catastrophe. We do this by building in the wrong places, by destroying the natural systems that protect us, and by creating a global climate that is more volatile and violent. To continue blaming fate or Mother Nature is to remain willing accomplices in our own destruction. The betrayal operates on every level, from the local contractor to the global corporation. It is the developer who paves a riverbed, the logger who clear-cuts a mountainside, the politician who sells a construction amnesty, and the fossil fuel executive who funds climate denial. They are all nodes in a complex network of profiteering that places human life as a secondary concern, an externality on a balance sheet. Their actions are not isolated mistakes. They are the logical outputs of a system that rewards short-term gain and discounts long-term risk. A system that has fundamentally decoupled economic activity from moral responsibility and ecological reality. This is why the language we use matters so profoundly. As long as we call these events natural disasters, we implicitly absolve the human agents of their guilt. We accept the narrative that these are random, unavoidable tragedies. But if we begin to call them what they are, corporate crimes, government failures, systemic betrayals, then the entire framework shifts. It moves from the realm of fate to the realm of justice. It transforms victims from passive sufferers into active pursuers of accountability. It demands not just aid and sympathy, but investigations, prosecutions, and fundamental radical change to the systems that enable these crimes. Therefore, the next time you see the devastating images of a community ravaged by a flood or a landslide, resist the urge to see it as a simple story of nature's power. Look for the hidden story, the human story behind the headlines. Ask who benefited from the deforestation. Ask who approved the construction in the floodplain. Ask which companies lobbied against the climate regulations that might have lessened the storm's intensity. The disaster is not the rain or the wind. The disaster is the betrayal that put people in their path, stripped them of their defenses, and then blamed the tragedy on fate. In business, profit often outweighs morality. Negligence becomes routine, woven into factories, farms, and labs. Safety is a cost, workers are resources, and consumers are targets. Catastrophe isn't an accident, it's the result of a system that rewards betrayal. Here, disaster is not a bug, but a business model. On April 24, 2013, the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh collapsed, killing over 1,100 garment workers. Cracks had appeared, but workers were forced back inside. Built illegally, packed with heavy machinery, the building was a monument to greed. The tragedy exposed the deadly cost of cheap fashion and corporate neglect. The food industry's pursuit of profit often puts our health at risk, right at our dinner tables. Behind glossy packaging, dangerous shortcuts and deception are common. From contaminated produce to adulterated ingredients, profit often outweighs safety. We trust a system that too often gambles with our well-being. Nowhere is the moral conflict between profit and human well-being more acute than in the pharmaceutical industry. This industry creates life-saving drugs, but often puts profit before patients, treating medicine as a luxury, not a right. Companies extend patents with minor changes, keeping prices high and competition out. Sometimes risks are hidden and lives are lost, all for profit. The result? Scandals, addiction, and a crisis of trust in medicine. While a factory collapse is sudden, there's a slower daily catastrophe. Workplace exploitation. Wage theft, unsafe conditions, and broken promises grind down millions, stealing health, dignity, and security. This betrayal is everywhere, quiet, ignored, but devastating. It's not the invisible hand of the market, but the heavy hand of power pressing down on the vulnerable. In economics, externalities are the hidden costs of business. Polluted rivers, low wages, broken bodies, pushed onto the public. These aren't side effects. They're the direct result of a system that values profit over people. To call them externalities is to sanitize betrayal. The truth, these are sacrifices, and not all are asked to make them equally. Every year, over 1.3 million people are killed on the world's roads, yet we have become numb to it. We call it a tragic but unavoidable consequence of modern mobility. But these are not acts of fate. They are acts of choice, predictable, preventable, and born of indifference. Section 2. The weapon in your hands, individual choices, collective consequences. Road fatalities often start with a single conscious decision behind the wheel. Answering a text, driving after drinks, speeding through a yellow light, not buckling a seatbelt. These small choices are profound acts of negligence. Operating a heavy machine at high speed requires full attention. A car can become a lethal weapon. Distracted driving is a modern epidemic. Smartphones are constant distractions. A 5-second glance at 55 miles per hour covers a football field. This is not an accident, it's a choice to abandon control. Families are shattered by these choices. Speed limits are not suggestions. Every mile per hour over the limit increases impact force. Reckless driving is Russian roulette. Anonymity fuels negligence. We forget other cars contain human beings. Individual choices create collective danger. One person's recklessness forces others to react. The carnage on our roads is the sum of these betrayals. When commercial vehicles crash, the tragedy is rarely just a driver's mistake. It's often the result of exhausted drivers, neglected maintenance, and companies prioritizing profit over safety. Passengers trust the system. Too often that trust is betrayed, and their journey ends in a tomb of twisted metal. Section 4. A system of impunity, the failure of enforcement. When traffic laws aren't enforced, they become mere suggestions. This creates a culture of impunity, where reckless driving goes unpunished and tragedies repeat. Weak enforcement and trivial penalties send a message: society doesn't take this violence seriously. The result? Daily preventable carnage on our roads. The time has come to eliminate the word accident from the conversation about road safety. The word itself is, honestly, a betrayal. It is a linguistic tranquilizer that numbs us to the reality of the situation. It implies an event that is random, unforeseen, and blameless. But as we have seen, the vast majority of traffic collisions are none of those things. They are predictable, they are preventable, and they are the result of culpable choices. By continuing to use the word accident, we perpetuate the myth of fate and provide a shield for the negligent. We must start calling these events what they are: crashes, collisions, and in many cases, crimes. This is more than just a semantic argument. It is a fundamental shift in mindset. When we see a crash as a preventable event, the focus shifts from grieving the outcome to investigating the cause. It compels us to ask the hard questions. Was the driver distracted? Were they speeding? Was the company forcing them to drive fatigued? Was the road poorly designed? Was enforcement absent? This shift transforms the event from a tragedy to be mourned into a problem to be solved. It moves the responsibility from the realm of abstract fate to the concrete actions of individuals, corporations, and governments. It demands accountability. Redefining the accident also means redefining our cultural relationship with the automobile. We must move away from a culture that glorifies speed and tolerates recklessness, and toward one that prioritizes safety and shared responsibility. This requires a multi-pronged approach. It means tougher laws and stricter, more consistent enforcement. It means embracing technology like automated speed cameras and mandatory alcohol detection systems in cars. It means designing our roads to protect the most vulnerable users, pedestrians and cyclists, not just to maximize the flow of vehicular traffic. It means holding corporations criminally liable when their policies lead to fatal crashes. Ultimately, the carnage on our roads is a choice we make as a society. We are not fated to lose over 1 million people a year. We choose to accept this death toll through our indifference, our prioritization of convenience over safety, and our failure to hold the negligent accountable. The driver who looks at their phone, the trucking company that fakes a logbook, and the politician who votes against speed cameras are all part of the same chain of betrayal. The next time you hear a news report about a fatal accident, reject the premise. It was not fate, it was a failure, it was a betrayal, and it was preventable. War is often called destiny, an inevitable cycle of conflict and suffering. But war is not fate. It is a choice made by a powerful few, far from the front lines. The narrative of inevitability hides the truth. War is the ultimate betrayal of peace, of resources, of the innocent. We must ask, is this really destiny, or a plan by those who profit from war? If war is a choice, we must first ask, cui bono, who benefits? The most direct and morally bankrupt beneficiaries are the merchants of death, the global arms industry. For these corporations, war is not a tragedy, it is a business opportunity. Peace is a liability, a prolonged simmering conflict is a recurring revenue stream. Their entire business model is predicated on creating and sustaining a world armed to the teeth. They produce the bombs, the bullets, the tanks, and the fighter jets, and then they profit from their use. Every bombed-out city, every military escalation, every new geopolitical flashpoint translates directly into rising stock prices and record-breaking profits for these companies. This industry does not passively wait for conflicts to arise, it actively cultivates them. Arms manufacturers spend billions of dollars on lobbying, employing armies of representatives to influence politicians and government officials in virtually every major capital. Their goal is to promote a heavily militarized foreign policy, to hype up threats, and to ensure that diplomatic solutions are always seen as secondary to military ones. They sponsor think tanks that produce reports advocating for increased defense spending. They make lavish campaign contributions to politicians who sit on armed services committees, ensuring a friendly reception when it comes time to approve massive weapons contracts. They are not just suppliers to the war machine, they are its architects and its chief engineers. The betrayal is cynical and global in its scope. The same company will often sell weapons to two opposing sides in a regional conflict, profiting from the escalation no matter who wins. They sell advanced military hardware to unstable regimes and dictatorships, knowing full well that these weapons will likely be used to oppress their own people or to start wars with their neighbors. They are a force for global instability, pouring gasoline on every geopolitical fire, because a world at peace is a world where their products are obsolete. The blood of soldiers and civilians is the ink with which they write their quarterly earnings reports. Their prosperity is directly proportional to human suffering. This makes them the ultimate puppet masters in the theater of war. While politicians give speeches about freedom, democracy, and national security, the arms dealers are in the background, ensuring that the script always includes a new, expensive weapon system. They have created a perpetual motion machine of conflict, where the use of weapons creates the need for more weapons, where destruction fuels the industry of destruction. To believe that wars are fought solely for ideology is to ignore the colossal financial interests that demand conflict. Fate has nothing to do with it. It is a simple, brutal business, and business is booming. The oil and gas industry thrives on global conflict. Wars and interventions often follow the map of the world's major oil reserves. Official reasons are given, but beneath it all lies the black fingerprint of oil. Young soldiers are told they fight for freedom, but it's really about control of energy. This is no accident. At the apex of the war machine sit political leaders, public faces who deliver somber speeches, visit troops for photo ops, and give the orders that unleash hell on earth. There is a grotesque disconnect between the architects of war and its victims. Leaders risk nothing, while the people they serve risk everything. They create devastation from absolute safety and luxury. Iraq and Afghanistan. Wars launched on false pretenses, fueled by profit and marked by endless suffering. They betrayed American soldiers, taxpayers, and most of all, the people of Iraq and Afghanistan. These were not inevitable tragedies, but deliberate choices that shattered nations and enriched a few at the cost of millions. Strip away the flags and anthems, and war is human cost: refugees, scarred soldiers, lost children, and graves. We are pawns in their game, our lives traded for power and profit. But the moment we refuse to accept war as fate, we reclaim our power. The dead are not martyrs to fate, they are evidence of a crime. In times of suffering, when all else fails, many turn to faith for hope. But this hope is vulnerable, easily exploited by those who see faith as profit. Enter the faith exploiter, turning belief into a marketplace. They promise miracles for money, selling hope to the desperate. Their wealth grows while the faithful pay the price. The success of the faith exploiter hinges on performance. They are masters of psychological manipulation, employing sophisticated theatrical techniques to create an overwhelming emotional experience that bypasses critical thought. The setting is crucial: a stage with dramatic lighting, a large, adoring crowd, and uplifting music that swells at key moments. This environment is designed to foster a sense of collective ecstasy, where individual skepticism is washed away by the powerful current of group belief. The preacher, a charismatic and commanding figure, works the crowd like a seasoned entertainer, their voice rising from a conspiratorial whisper to a thundering roar, evoking tears, cheers, and shouts of amen. A key element of this theater is the performance of miracles, most commonly faith healings. These events are often carefully staged. Individuals with visible but non-specific ailments, such as back pain or difficulty walking, are brought on stage. In a crescendo of music and prayer, the preacher lays hands on them, commanding the affliction to leave. The person then miraculously walks without their cane or declares their pain is gone. The crowd erupts, their faith affirmed by the proof they have just witnessed. What they don't see are the pre-screenings, the power of suggestion, or the fact that many of these healed individuals are found to be suffering from the same ailments days later. It is a cruel and manipulative show that offers false hope to the truly sick in the audience. These prophets of profit are also experts at creating a sense of urgency and exclusivity. They will offer limited-time blessings, prophetic words available only to those who call a hotline in the next 10 minutes, or anointed prayer cloths that have been personally blessed and are available for a special donation. This transforms a spiritual message into a high-pressure sales pitch, using the same tactics as a late-night infomercial. They create a fear of missing out, not on a discounted product, but on God's grace itself. This pressure is particularly effective on vulnerable individuals who feel that their one chance at a miracle might slip away if they don't act now. The most insidious part of this deception is how it isolates the follower from any dissenting voice. The preacher often frames any skepticism or criticism from family members, journalists, or former followers as an attack from the devil. They cultivate an us versus the world mentality, where the only source of truth is the preacher and their ministry. Followers are told to have unquestioning faith and to reject the negativity of non-believers. This creates a closed-loop system, an echo chamber where the fraud is protected from scrutiny, and the victims are further entrenched in the deception, often alienating themselves from the very people who could help them see the truth. Some religious charities exploit our compassion, using heart-wrenching images and noble promises to collect donations, while only a tiny fraction ever reaches those in need. Most funds are siphoned off for luxury and personal gain, betraying both donors and the vulnerable, and eroding trust in real charity. In the end, the world's most vulnerable are left with even less support than before. Faith exploiters twist patience and fate into tools of control. They preach passive acceptance to the oppressed, urging them to endure suffering for heavenly rewards while they live in luxury. This doctrine keeps the poor docile, convincing them that justice is impiety. It's not fate, it's a systematic abuse of hope, protecting the powerful and perpetuating suffering. We've seen betrayals by individuals and leaders. But what happens when the very systems meant to protect us, government, infrastructure, justice, become the source of disaster? When the state itself fails, its citizens become casualties. This isn't random, it's targeted neglect leaving the vulnerable exposed. This is not fate, but the calculated outcome of a broken system. The decay of healthcare and education is a betrayal. These pillars should ensure our future, but underfunding and neglect have turned them into instruments of inequality. Hospitals that cannot heal, schools that cannot teach. These are not accidents, but the result of choices that keep the poor powerless. The wealthy opt out, while the rest are left behind. This is the ultimate betrayal of equal opportunity. The justice system should be our final refuge, where truth is sacred and all are equal before the law. But when it becomes a tool of oppression, the last pillar of society crumbles. Prisons overflow with the poor while the powerful walk free. This is not justice, it's betrayal, and society pays the price. In a corrupt system, truth is not a virtue, it's a threat. Journalists, activists, and ordinary people who dare to speak out are silenced or destroyed. The state criminalizes thought, buries truth under lies, and enforces self-censorship. Silencing truth isn't the end, it's the maintenance of betrayal, a lock on a prison built of lies. From censorship to the courtroom, the regime builds a fortress of control, blocking books, silencing protests, and turning trials into theater. Dissent is met with force, and justice is a performance. But every act of suppression reveals fear, and every silenced truth is a crack in their fragile foundation. The silencing of truth is the ultimate admission of guilt. We have journeyed through the ruins of so-called fate, from disaster zones to battlefields, confronting the illusion that tragedy is destiny. Today we have taken a sledgehammer to this temple of inevitability, revealing its foundations: corruption, greed, and excuses. It's time to reject the myth of fate and reclaim responsibility. Our world is shaped by choices, not destiny. Throughout our investigation, a clear and undeniable pattern has emerged. The anatomy of the lie is always the same, whether the disaster is an earthquake, a flood, a war, or a factory collapse. First, the predictable becomes the unthinkable. Years of warnings from scientists, engineers, and activists are ignored. The risks are known, the vulnerabilities are documented, but no action is taken because prevention is not as profitable or politically glamorous as a post-disaster response. The system proceeds with a willful blindness, a collective gamble that the inevitable won't happen today. This is the period of silent betrayal, where the foundations for tragedy are methodically laid. Second, the tragedy strikes. The ground shakes, the waters rise, the building collapses, the war begins. The initial shock and horror are immense. The media descends, capturing scenes of chaos and heartbreak. In this moment of profound confusion and grief, the narrative is immediately shaped by those in power. They deploy the language of destiny. It was an unprecedented storm, an unimaginably powerful earthquake, a tragic, unavoidable conflict. They call it the disaster of the century. They invoke God's will. The word fate echoes through every press conference and official statement, setting the stage for the absolution of guilt that is to follow. Third, the blame is deflected. As the initial shock wears off and anger begins to surface, a carefully managed search for scapegoats begins. A few low-level officials may be fired. A single contractor might be arrested for the cameras. The focus is narrowed to individual bad apples, preventing any serious inquiry into the rotten barrel from which they came. The systemic issues, the corrupt policies, the culture of deregulation, the profit-driven decision-making, are never put on trial. The investigation is designed not to find the root cause, but to provide a politically acceptable conclusion that allows the system to continue, unchanged. It is a performance of accountability, not the practice of it. Finally, the cycle is reset. After a period of public mourning and empty promises of never again, a collective amnesia is encouraged. The funds allocated for reconstruction are often funneled through the same corrupt channels that caused the problem. The new regulations that are passed are soon weakened or left unenforced. The public's attention moves on, and the same vulnerabilities are allowed to fester, waiting for the next act of fate to expose them once more. This repeating pattern is not an accident. It is the operational manual for a system of perpetual betrayal, a system that profits from disaster and has no incentive to prevent it. Confronted with this grim reality, it is easy to feel a sense of overwhelming despair. It is easy to conclude that the forces of greed and power are too entrenched, too monolithic to ever be challenged. This feeling of helplessness is precisely the state the system wants you in. It thrives on your apathy. It is sustained by your resignation. The narrative of fate is designed not only to absolve the guilty, but also to paralyze the innocent, to convince you that you are merely a passive victim, a piece of driftwood in the relentless current of history. But we have a choice. We can reject the role of the victim and embrace the power of the witness. A victim accepts the story they are told. A witness questions it. A victim endures their suffering. A witness documents it. A victim grieves in silence. A witness speaks truth to power. To be a witness is to refuse to be a passive object in someone else's narrative, and to become an active agent in your own. It is to see the collapsed building and ask about the inspector's bank records. It is to see the flooded town and demand to see the zoning permits. It is to see the dead soldier and scrutinize the defense contractor's stock price. It is to transform every tragedy from a moment of passive sorrow into an act of active investigation. This choice is not easy. The path of the witness is fraught with difficulty and discomfort. It requires a commitment to paying attention when it is easier to look away. It requires the courage to ask unpopular questions and to challenge deeply held beliefs. It requires you to be the cynic at the table who refuses to accept the simple, comforting explanations. It means carrying the burden of anger and frustration at the injustice you see, but it is the only path that holds any hope of breaking the cycle. A population of passive victims is a ruler's dream. A population of active witnesses is their worst nightmare. The power of the witness is the power of collective sight. A single person who sees the truth can be dismissed as a crank. 1,000 people who see the truth can be labeled as troublemakers. But millions of people who open their eyes and see the betrayal for what it is cannot be ignored. They become a political force, a social movement, a cultural shift. They create a new consensus where accountability is demanded and impunity is no longer tolerated. The choice to become a witness is the first, most crucial step in reclaiming our world from those who have betrayed it. It begins with a simple revolutionary act, refusing to believe their lies. This journey does not end here. It ends with you. Your questions, your choices, your gaze. This knowledge is a torch. What you do with it is the most important part of the story. Wake up. Open your eyes. See the choices, the greed, the betrayal. These systems are brittle, they can be broken. The truth is your choice. The future is unwritten.